Hello and welcome to the Miko Bits show, and I'm your host, Miko Bits. Today I have an exciting show. We're going to be talking about NFTs or non-fungible tokens with Jake Brukhman, and it's going to be very exciting. So I guess first things first, this is an opinion show. It's not intended to be investment advice. NFTs don't really have the same investment pattern as normal tokens, but seek a licensed professional if you're looking for investment advice. Before we start, if you're interested in Bitcoin and blockchain, please consider clicking that subscribe button and also click the bell so you can get notifications about future videos that I might post. Thank you. Okay, so hello, Jake.
Hello, Miko. Thank you for having me.
Of course. We're very excited to have you on the show. You're definitely a great, knowledgeable expert in the world of NFT. And, this seems to be sort of the red hot trend these days. I think we were just chatting about kind of this hockey stick phenomenon. And, I think you can see all the kind of data on things like Dune Analytics and whatnot. So, I think it's exciting. So, I guess let's just jump right into it. So, what are your thoughts, and how can we kind of dig in and crack the space open?
Yeah, well, I guess like one thing to say is it's probably a lot to do with timing. The timing has gotten a little bit more right for this space, and the space has matured a little bit, right? Like it's been around for a number of years. I remember the very, very first NFTs or non-fungible tokens we were seeing on this blockchain called Counterparty, which was built on top of Bitcoin, and that was back in 2016. And the things that they were putting on it were these like what's called rare pepes, or this like meme green frog, has a lot of memes around it online. And we've come so far since then, right? That was just kind of an experiment. And where we are now is we have an ecosystem of companies. Some of them are marketplaces where you can buy and sell these non-fungible tokens. Some of them are issuance platforms where you can create them. Some of them are using non-fungibles as a financial, in some kind of financialization mechanism. Maybe you're getting loans or something by depositing non-fungible tokens. And most importantly, I think there's a little bit of early traction that we're seeing, which is what you were referring to with the hockey stick formation. The hockey stick is in the on-chain trading volume of how people are trading NFTs today. And the last thing I'll say is there's probably a lot more kind of investor, especially venture investor, interest in the space. So funds have started to make investments in these companies.
Yeah, so I think going back to the very basics, right? Obviously, we know that a non-fungible token is really kind of like a novel token issuance of one unit, right? So I guess, is that a fair statement? Like that the fungibility is really related to there being a whole bunch of these things that are all exactly alike, right? So the idea of a non-fungible is the idea that they're not alike, or that every single one is unique at some level, right? So the question that I would have for you is, you talked a bit about the history of this, which is super interesting. Obviously, CryptoKitties was an epic kind of moment in the development of that in the form of collectibles. But like, are there any other kind of historical things to note, like things that we should be aware of as we kind of unpack this space?
Well, I think the general theme of blockchain as a whole, for me, has been watching people ask the question of like, how is blockchain going to get adopted, and when is that going to happen, and like, what are the areas which will kind of hit the consumer markets first? And what I have observed over the history of NFTs is that very much so, it's starting with this kind of obscure area of digital art. Like digital art is not a huge area in like the traditional art market. It's definitely a growing area. It's definitely an area where artists operate. But I kind of feel like the smaller community of digital artists has this like really great product market fit with NFTs and with blockchain. And so historically, what you see is the people who are doing this are not the prototypical blockchain enthusiasts who are very technical, or maybe they're finance nerds, or maybe they know how to how to use these like more financial products. They're in fact just kind of art people, and these art people, they're very creative, they're very adventurous, they love to experiment. They'll go and buy some ether, put it in a wallet, and will try to mint an artwork on the blockchain. And so this consistent historical theme that I'm seeing is that this small group of people is growing, and more of them are kind of coming to blockchain and starting to put art on the blockchain and starting to actually earn a living, some of them, by becoming full-time digital artists. And that's like really exciting.
That is amazing. So it sounds to me like the burgeoning category in this is really about art and art collectibles.
Well, I think that's what we see today, for sure. And I would say like the vast majority of volume in NFTs is going to be around things like digital art. It's going to be things like CryptoKitties, like collectibles. In-game assets is also a pretty big category. But if you read the thesis that my fund, CoinFund, has put out, and that I primarily sort of authored, we really see NFTs as the almost this, we say it's liquid intellectual property. It's the property rights, not just of art and collectibles, but also really of any digital content. And if you put on your investor hat, this is where things get really interesting, because if you start to surmise and count how much digital content there's out there, there's actually a ton. It's not just art, it's not just collectibles, it's not just in-game assets. It's also things like photography and stock photography and 3D models and metaverse assets and domain names. People make money off of writing blogs, right, and syndicating them. People sell their music, they sell their videos, they sell their podcasts. One day you might be able to take the MikoBits show and tokenize that in some way, right? And so when you start to count up this space of digital content, you realize it's like very large, and most of the time people don't trade it on secondary markets, and that's because they don't own their digital content really. And so what blockchain enables is this strong ownership of this content, and that ownership enables secondary markets, and that's why we think NFTs unlock this tremendous amount of value on chain.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think that over the evolution of the history, we have seen different phases. Like obviously CryptoKitties was pure collectible, then we kind of saw the emergence of more gamification, and it seems like the thing that's fascinating about what you're describing with this kind of resurgent wave is that the art collectible concept is really bringing sort of new people, and I think that's really kind of an amazing achievement. It's hard to see, not a lot of segments in the space have really attracted new users, so it's fascinating. The thing that strikes me as really interesting about the space is that people can experiment with almost like this concept of authenticity. Right. And so I guess I'm curious, like, whether you have any kind of examples or the things that you've seen that are kind of noteworthy about singular artifacts or digital objects.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. I run, in addition to CoinFund, my kind of passion project is that I actually run a digital art gallery, and that's called firstedition.xyz. And the reason that it's called First Edition is because kind of earlier on in the NFT space, it started collecting NFT works from this company and this product called Additional, which was a little bit of like an Instagram where you created an image, which usually was an artwork of some kind, and then you got, as the author, you got the edition number 1.
Yep.
And everybody else, like your followers, got some of the other editions. So if you made like 10, you'd get the first one, and they would get the other 9. And that was like a very interesting model, because in that model, it caused the first edition to really be like the most valuable one, because it was like seen as like the original, the one that was owned by the by the creator themselves. And so if you got your hands on this edition one, potentially you could sell it for more money. And that's why the art gallery is called first edition. And so there's a bit of that. There's a bit of like trying to figure out like where is this art and what makes it valuable. And a lot of people say, well, why would I buy an artwork online when I can just right click and save the artwork on my computer and not have to pay for it? I could just print it out and put it on my wall.
Yeah.
And that's a really good question. And the short answer to that question is because when you're buying this NFT asset, you're not paying for the work, you're paying for the property rights to the work. At least like that's how it will be in the future. And so if you were to take a snapshot of the Mona Lisa and try to sell that for $800 million, it wouldn't really work, right? Because you don't actually own the thing. You can't put it in a gallery and charge people money to see it, right? It's just a copy. And when you go into the digital art realm, things get really interesting philosophically, because digital art doesn't actually exist anywhere. It's not really the thing in the creator's Photoshop. It's not really the thing, the image in the email that he sends. It's kind of ephemeral. And so what blockchain it allows someone to do with an ephemeral artwork is to find where it is in the universe. Oh, it's on the blockchain. That's where it is. If you own this token, then you can then denote ownership of this idea that really otherwise exists in our minds.
So it feels to me that obviously the blockchain itself is the kind of domain of rights management, right? So in a sense, like that's the ultimate arbiter of kind of the authenticity, and it's the ultimate arbiter of kind of the truth of ownership, right? So that's very clear to me. But the thing that I think is so interesting about this idea is that there's a dimension of kind of showing off that I think relates to kind of ownership of something, of an intellectual asset, right? And obviously that suggests the concept of galleries and this type of thing. But I guess for me, the thing that's kind of interesting is what are the domains where intellectual property rights are kind of visually enforced, right? So it feels like obviously having like for example, one of the easiest examples of this would be like in a game world, right? So like if you had an NFT game, right, the game itself, the software of the game would enforce the intellectual property rules, right? Obviously, otherwise it would be a pretty stupid game, right? Like from an NFT perspective, right? Like, oh, I have this one in-game item that's unique in all the world, and if you had like 50,000 of them in the game, it would make the game pretty pointless. So I guess what I'm trying to understand are, what are the kind of fledgling examples of these types of environments? Like, are there obviously gallery types of things? You run a gallery, like where are we seeing kind of the enforcement of intellectual property, right? Because obviously it doesn't apply to like the old internet, right? Because anybody can screenshot your thing and go onto the classic internet, right, and copy it as much as they want.
Well, let me just say, I think we're like pre-actual implementation of this, but if you look elsewhere in tech, right, like you'll see people working on open source software, for example.
Yep.
And someone who's a creator, if you will, of open source software, they'll generally go and pick a license. They'll say, oh, this is the MIT license, or this is the NetBSD license, or whatever it is. And different licenses basically create different property rights for the users of that software. Now, we are not quite there yet in blockchain. There's a lot of precedent for combining legal tech and blockchain tech, and there's certainly a lot of people are doing it. Check out like the Lao or Open Law, what those guys are doing. But we have not actually implemented this yet in NFT world. And I think like when we are not being explicit about which property rights are being conferred to users, then it sort of like defaults to general legal property rights. And I would say it goes without saying that creators today who create NFTs, there's sort of a tacit understanding that if I sell you, an NFT that I made, I'm giving you this strong ownership of it on the blockchain. And what that does is it entitles you to resell it, to lend it, to make money off of it, because you're really like the de facto owner, the physical owner of this asset. Now, you also raised a very interesting point, which is like, where are we using these things? And I think it's also very early for that. But what we do see is there are definitely a couple of companies that are doing digital picture frames, and so you can have one of these things in your house and display some of the artwork that you made. In particular, a company that I like and I'm an angel investor in, it's called Async, and what they've done is they created this Apple TV app where you can place some of the art that is created on their platform and interact with it. That's what Async does. It's interactive artworks. And then there's also this other really interesting phenomenon, which is that there's a bunch of virtual worlds in blockchain. Some of those are called Decentraland or CryptoVoxels, and others there's many more. There's probably about 10 of them. And the number one use case for these virtual worlds, guess what? It's people building art museums and putting some of
Wow.
these NFTs into the virtual
Oh, that's
museums.
great.
Yeah, yeah. And if you visit like CryptoVoxels, you'll find that like most of the buildings in that world have some kind of NFT or artwork in it. And a lot of the time you can go and purchase it if you like it. Now, what I think will happen also in the future is I think that we'll get a lot more integrations of digital art out there in the world. I think we'll see digital billboards put up some of these works, and maybe you'll even be able to interact with them from your phone. The billboards in Times Square. I feel like there's just a lot of screens in the world anyway, and someone's going to build a startup which will distribute some of these artworks across those screens. There'll be services that maybe make the works physical. Maybe they print them out for you, so you could enjoy them in a physical format, and so on and so forth. So I think we're just getting started in this space.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me as very interesting is kind of the rise of, maybe you could call it the authentic internet, or the rise of authentic or authenticity, right? And the thing that's so interesting on the internet today is inauthenticity, right? Which is that there's a huge amount of kind of like fake news or conspiracy theories or kind of manipulated images, deep fakes, and so it's really the world is full of fakery, right? And I think that originality and authenticity are kind of it's kind of the infrastructure of the next generation of internet. So I think that there's definitely
Totally.
something to where the game could go. I mean, how do you think about
This
that?
is Yeah, this is a great point, Miko. I feel like, sort of privacy, uh, security, and authenticity are really like the digital, issues, the digital political issues of our time. So going with authenticity, it's like it's exactly how you said. Like, how do we know that this article in the newspaper is saying real things? And in the same way, how do we know that this particular work, was actually created by the creator that it says it was created by? And blockchain provides an answer to this, right? This idea of cryptography that's used in the implementations of blockchain enable us to create strong on-chain identities. In other words, an artist goes, he creates an account, he verifies that account variously, maybe with his Twitter feed or his other social media feed, or maybe people sort of vouch for him and say, like, I know that's the account of Miko. And then once you have that identity, then you use it to denote creation. And so someone can always look back on the blockchain and say, who created this thing? Oh, it was Miko. And I know and trust that account and that identity of his on chain. And so it's actually an answer to that authenticity question.
I
And
like,
NFTs,
yeah.
I was just going to say that NFTs are the primary example of this because ownership matters so much
Yeah, yeah,
in that
that's
context.
very astute, right? Because one of the problems, actually, even in the real art, real is a bad word. In the kind of 3D art world, that's a bad word too. In the historical art world, is counterfeits, right? So I think
Right.
authenticity, it used to be a combination of kind of like the artist would put their signature on something, right? So that was one form of authentication, which I think is pretty weak. And then the other one is just really looking at art styles, right? Like, for example, one of the things that was known about like Rembrandt is that Rembrandt did a lot of painting over, right? And so one way to judge an authenticity is to do some kind of like X-ray scan and to look for layers of paint and try to understand like how many layers of paint does this painting have, and is that consistent with the style, right? And how do
Yeah.
so all of those types of like mechanisms. But like the thing that's really interesting about what you're saying is that like we've reached a point where digital authentication, and digital signing becomes, kind of the ultimate arbiter, right? Where it's like, well, this is for
Yeah.
sure the thing. And I think you can only really do that with something that is natively digital, right? I mean, obviously you could issue a
Yeah.
certificate that's somehow uh, indelibly connected with a physical object somehow, or you could,
So,
anyhow, go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, so I have a story for you on this exact topic, which is that I bought the artwork of a real digital artist, and this is someone who sells works in, Christie's and Sotheby's, um, and the way that he creates art is that he creates it on the computer, but his artworks are actually physical. He just kind of prints out the generative works, and then frames them, and that's what he sells. And so when I purchased this work of his, he gave me a certificate of authenticity. And that certificate of authenticity was actually it was about a 40-page printout of the code that was required to generate this otherwise like
That's
physical work.
amazing.
And if you have something like that in your possession, like maybe that's a bit of a stronger indicator that you are in fact the author, because you had to get the code somewhere, and usually people keep this private. So if you have the possession of it, maybe that is a good kind of proof of authenticity. But then again, it's not as strong as him signing with a cryptographic key and saying, "This is unquestionably me," right? Like even if I have that 40-page printout, I can never really be sure where he got it.
Yeah, yeah. Someone could potentially copy the 40 pages somehow, and then, or a hacker could get
Right,
the 40 pages. And obviously, a hacker could also
right.
get the private key of the artist. But, like, I do think that you're right. Like, these kinds of methods are so important. This is a digression, but one of the things that I have a bit of a passion for is I'm really looking forward to things like phone cameras having kind of inbuilt cryptographic signing, right? Because
Yes.
I'm really looking forward to the idea that we can actually authenticate to the point of creation things like camera images, and to the point of creation things like videos. Now, obviously, like there are things you can do, like you can create like a fake scenario with actors, and then you can have a real video of a fake event, right? But at least you can reach the point where you have the camera device hardware that's using a key to authenticate, and maybe you could have like decentralized Oracle providing a timestamp as opposed to having a traditional timestamp that comes from the hardware, right? Because people, there's a lot of jokes about like, someone on Twitter was joking that they can get bigger Bitcoin rewards by setting their system clock on their PC back in time. It's super obvious joke, but like, it's, fake things are like such a problem. So I think this is something that we have to look at.
Yeah, I love that idea. I feel like we have absolutely all the technology needed to be able to do things like signing photographs that you take on your iPhone. I would be surprised if some manufacturers weren't already doing that, or at least starting to think about doing that. But that's a great point. Like that would be like a very, very simple and very productive way of verifying authenticity of at least the fact that, this is a real photograph and not something that's photoshopped.
And I think that there might be some way to generate novel value that way too, right? In the sense that like users could gain confidence about even just very stupid things. Like, if someone tweets a picture and says no filter, like, you could get like maybe a hundredth of a penny worth of value to see that that's actually authenticated, that there actually isn't a filter there, but I think
Yeah.
that the applications that are more salient would be things like news, so it's like news footage,
Yeah.
and getting confidence about that kind of stuff. Because I think for a while, like, CNN was accepting news images and videos from random people, and I think that trend kind of decreased because of the inability to authenticate it. So I think all of that stuff is kind of tangent to this. But I think what you're really poking at in your original description is kind of this authentic world, right? So it's a world of authentic information as well as authentic ownership, right? I think that's kind of what
Yes.
matters in this.
Yes, and if you look at the way I guess how traditionally the art, specifically the art side of things, has worked, like the provenance of an object or a piece of art is really, really important, right? So that chain of owners, oh, this was owned by the King of France, and then it was owned by, Bill Gates, or like whatever that chain of provenance is, I think like dramatically contributes to how people value the work. Well, if Bill Gates thought it was good, then certainly it's valuable, or something like that. And on the blockchain, using NFT technology, that's exactly what you get. If you go on like Rarible today, Rarible is
Yep.
my favorite NFT marketplace. And you click the owners tab, you'll sort of see a list of like everybody, who owns the works, and that might inform how you value the work, right? And then also you can pull a chain of provenance of like, oh, first it was owned by this person and that person, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so I think that, making that technological is super interesting, because then it also opens up this world of like, maybe we can compute the value, based on the data that we have. Another aspect of this is like a lot of information about art, collectibles, and in-game assets. It's not even available, right? So once we actually make that digital, we put that data out there, then there's amazing things that we'll be able to do with the data.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about this, right? Because I was actually talking with Roham and Mick from CryptoKitties, the Dapper guys, and one of the conversations that came up was looking at blockchain as kind of a novel consensus history recording device, right? So if you look at the blockchain as a history recorder, then the thing that becomes so interesting is the idea of ownership of a piece of history, right? So when you talk about things like provenance, not only is there the notion of kind of a chain of ownership, but also that there is historical connotation or denotation, right? So I guess an example of this could come from something like the gaming industry. So in the gaming industry, there are one of the things that's happened is kind of the free to play gaming, right? And free to play gaming is kind of dominated by kind of skins, right, that produce no impact to gameplay, right? They're just purely cosmetic, right? So you can get a skin, right? But like, for example, you could potentially see in an NFT world, you could issue specific non-fungible skins, right? And you could actually have historical events tied to the non-fungible skins. So for example, you could say like, here's the world championship of a multi-million viewer game like League of Legends, right? And you could say, we're issuing 10 copies of this skin, and only one of them will have been the one used by the champion in game during the championship match, right? So in a sense, it becomes like a sports jersey, right? It becomes kind of like, oh, this is
Yes.
the jersey that Michael Jordan was wearing during the championship game for the NBA, so it's basically like that. It becomes a historical artifact. So I think that's a dimension in which
Yes.
provenance becomes more than just supply chain.
Yes, and I'm so glad that you brought up this angle, because I also recently heard this very interesting like generalized view on NFTs as, let me state it this way. It's almost like browser cookies but for the real world, right? So here's what we mean by that. Imagine you go to a sporting event, or you go to a conference, or you go to a restaurant, or you go to a coffee shop, and by virtue of appearing there in real life, you get an NFT that says like, oh, I went and got a
This is
coffee here,
great.
or right, or I attended this game, or I attended this conference. In fact, in blockchain, there already is a protocol that that distributes NFTs for conference attendance, and that's protocol is called POAP, Proof of Attendance Protocol. Now imagine that like once you have a lot of data about where people went, what they did, and that data is denoted by these assets, then you can start to use them as piece of information. And this is where like a lot of privacy issues also come up. You also don't want to like invade anybody's privacy with this in the same sense of cookies. But you can see this being a huge value add for, kind of brands, like understanding targeting for their products. You can just see it being kind of a fun thing, like I attended this historic event and I commemorated that with a token, which I can now resell as a collector's item in the same way that people resell, I don't know, World War II memorabilia or something like that. Right. So I thought that view of NFTs was very different from how we usually frame them as art or collectibles, just very physical sounding, areas. And if you reframe that as like kind of like where you were at a certain point in time, that's a really interesting view.
I like that so much because in a way there's an element, right? Like there's a concept of this concept of relics, right? And the concept of like, so if you look at relics from kind of the classical view, right? There are actually primary and secondary relics, that are cherished in kind of religious contexts, right? And the primary relic is actually like a physical body part of a saint, and a secondary relic is something that they wore, or a scepter that they carried around, or something like that, right? But the thing that's really interesting about what you're describing is that there is this concept that connects to the authenticity of the artifact, right? And so when you talk about something like a physical event that you attended, in a way you're creating kind of micro history, right? And that the value of that history can be kind of auctioned, right? So in a sense, like it's one of the things it reminds me of is sort of the exchanging of Grateful Dead bootleg audio tapes, in the sense that like, and this was an exchange and a free exchange rather than like a sales or commercial venture, right? But I think one of the things that happened with the Grateful Dead as a band is that they would always create novel sound. So every single event that they would produce would be novel because of the improvisational style of the music.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing that was so interesting is that in a sense, having a bootleg of a specific event would have two contexts. One context would be I was there, right? And so when you produce it, someone else is like, oh, you were at that conference in this particular, or you were at this event. And, and then the other thing that it does though, is that people have very specific memories associated with the specific things that were happening when a specific song would come on, right? So they would say, oh, like I know what was happening to me. I met my future spouse when they were playing that song, at that specific date, and that was the version that they were playing. Anyhow, so it kind of reminds me of, this idea of like, I mean, it's funny. But it really like memory and history and authenticity, and then like
Yeah.
this kind of concept of the browser cookie, I think is huge.
You made me think of like the President Trump's inaugural rally, right? And how there was a lot of contention around how many people actually attend. And I feel like in the future, we probably be able to count attendance to things like that in a very transparent and public way. Maybe using some of these NFT technologies.
That's a great idea. I like that. I like that. Then there would not be any fake news. You could just authenticate through digital signatures. You could say, "Oh yeah, this."
Yeah, yeah. I think we need to get to that world eventually, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the fascinating things about the kind of gaming world is that in a way, like there is a thirst for originality and authenticity, right? Like one of the examples of it are the behavior of people around like server first events, right? So for example, if your guild is the server first to down a new content, then you can get some kind of an in-game item, right? Like a legendary item. Right? And what you're going to see is you're going to see like the person who got the item is going to go to the most crowded location in the world, like the auction house, and then they're going to equip the item and then like jump around and then have everyone talking about, wow, like you're the guy with the item. Right. And then like 1 week later, there's like 30 guys with the exact same item, right? Because it's just become so easy to like take the boss down, because everyone knows how to do it now, right? But the thing that's so funny about an NFT world is in an NFT world, like you wouldn't see that kind of it's counter inflationary. It's kind of, like there's no inflation, right? Like it's not like, oh, there's 30 of those items or there's 300 of those items, over time, right? Where they're just gradually losing their impressiveness because people just arbitrarily print more. I mean, that's kind of the summary.
Right. Right. And and it's interesting because we have seen a bit of that too sometimes in in creators some people, will occasionally abuse the platforms, and some people just don't know
Yeah.
like how to use them properly. But you will see like an artist on occasion, mint something in limited edition and then mint it again,
Oof.
right? And so you're like, you want to really maintain that scarcity. But the good news about all of that is that because it's so transparent on the blockchain, you can catch that behavior right away, and that helps you to to curb it. It helps you to moderate it. It also helps you to evaluate perhaps the price of these assets. So it all comes back to this fundamental, really open, really transparent technology that really enables full information about how these assets are transacted.
I think that there would in a stable, fully informed marketplace, that type of behavior would receive an economic punishment, right? Because obviously,
Yes.
if someone's like, I'm selling you this original artwork, and then they sell the same original artwork, with maybe 1 pixel different, but it's really exactly the same damn thing, and they sell it to 300 other people, I think word would get around. Like eventually, I think that the price of that art would be very punished by that kind of behavior.
Yeah, and there's also been some kind of controversial experiments, like Murat, I think, had a work that was consistent of only white pixels, right? So,
Wow.
and it sold quite a bit, but it was the work, I think, in a series of works that really did, have a deeper meaning, kind of collectively, but as an individual work, it was just sort of interesting to see. And the other thing I think about in this on this topic is, like sometimes you see someone selling a one of one limited edition work that's very scarce. There's only like one copy of it on the blockchain. And then other times you see people selling like one of 10. So they mint 10 different editions. And it could be a little bit misleading, right? So if you're, what's worth more, the one of one for 1 ether, or the one of 10 for zero point 0.1 ether, right? But actually, the set of works is going to be valued like exactly the same as the one of one work, right? So as someone who's buying, you also have to be like really careful in terms of understanding what the scarcity is of the thing that you're buying. It's kind of easy to overpay if you're not.
Yeah, yeah. It's so fascinating. I think one thing that would be so interesting would be to start to see kind of non-digital and artists kind of really moving in. Obviously you mentioned that there were already quite a few that are starting to move in, but I think what would be really interesting would be like a Banksy moment. Like one of the things that Banksy did that I
Hmm.
thought was so interesting was the shredding art,
Hmm.
which I think was like a really world's first kind of, I don't know, it was an incredible collision of like art and commerce and performance art and the whole thing, which is obviously, for those who don't recall, he basically had a shredder built into the frame of an artwork, and then when it was purchased, the frame shredded the artwork, or at least partially shredded it, and so that was a shocking moment. But like, it feels like a Banksy moment. It would be interesting for the space, to have like an internationally previously famous artist, just come into the space like that.
Yeah, that's a cool one. I'm sure it was very surprising for the owners. But it's a really cool idea. I think the other thing he did one time was he made a bunch of works and he just innocuously sold them like somewhere in Manhattan. In Manhattan they always have these like little stands where people are selling their art, and it wasn't labeled as Banksy, and nobody really was informed that Banksy was going to do this. So people kind of just like bought it, um, and then realized that they were in possession of art that was like very, very valuable. So I thought that was like pretty cool. And we have that effect on occasion in the NFT world because we've now had art that's sold for as much as $35,000 a piece. And I don't mean collectibles. I don't mean a crypto kitty. I actually mean a creator, a digital artist's work that has sold for that much. So, and that was Pac. But we're starting to see definitely like an increase in the value and the resale values of some of these works.
That's amazing. And I guess tell me a little bit. Do you know much about the art and the artist in this case? Like, tell us a little bit about what the highest selling art looks like or is like.
Hmm. Yeah, I think like generally speaking, Pac is the probably the best selling, or at least like the artists who have sold the work at the highest prices.
Yep.
Um, there's a bunch of different crypto artists that sort of came into their own almost like art career by way of blockchain art, which I think is very, very interesting. Um, the stories that I really love, Miko, is when people who were not able to be artists before discover this technology and are able to earn a living doing art, which is the thing that they really love to do. One of my favorite examples of that is Yalitza Rodriguez. She's someone who grew up in the state of New Jersey, which is where I grew up, like not far from me. Was introduced to digital art. Well, she was doing like photography and stuff on her own, but she was introduced to blockchain art through this app called Additional, where my fund was an investor. And Additional, unfortunately, like pivoted out of blockchain, went to do other things. But Yalitza remained in the space, and she started just doing more experimentation, just trying to find kind of her artistic area and voice as a digital artist. She ended up going to a bunch of different platforms, and over time she became like one of the first like hashtag crypto art people, and started selling works. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, she's now going into a digital art program officially. So she's now officially an artist because of this technology. And another case, which is an artist that we showcased last year at first edition, is a gentleman he lives in Dallas. He's an immigrant from Nigeria. He drives an ambulance. That's his like day job. But his passion is for creating works of art on his phone. He has all these like different apps that he's installed that he uses to process all these works. They're all very symmetrical. They have like interesting color combinations. His name is O Savage, and we featured him in a virtual art opening in our virtual gallery in crypto voxels last year, and he ended up selling about $350 worth of his digital art. He was absolutely amazed. He never thought that he would be able to make money from this. He said his wife didn't even believe that he made that much money selling the art, and that was an amount of money that it was meaningful for him and his family. And so like this is the kind of stuff I love to see. Um, and in Yalitz's case, by the way, what I realized is that I was actually the first purchaser of one of her pieces of digital art. So I paid her the first uh, purchase that she ever, it was the first sale that she ever made in crypto art. And that work is actually on the front page of first edition right now. It's Yalitza's self-portrait. So check it out at firstedition.xyz.
That's amazing. And I think that that's those kinds of stories are really wonderful, right? Because you're really talking about this incredible intersection of something where, lives are being changed, and people are being transformed through the emergence of this new medium. I guess one question I have for you is, to what extent does the medium affect the message, and how do you see the evolution of that, right? Because it feels like the technology has always had a strong influence and impact on art. Like for example,
Yeah.
I think that the standard for a while was kind of achieving near photorealism in oil painting. And I think after kind of color photography started coming into tech, like people stopped aspiring to that, and they started going into cubism or whatever, right? So I guess my question
Yeah.
is how do you feel about the impact of, because it feels like in the early stages of the technology, it feels like Pepe's, or it feels like, art with like the Bitcoin's logo in it, or, things like that kind of tend to fly more. But like, how do you feel about the state of it, and, what's happening?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question. Like in high school, one of my favorite classes was communications, where we actually studied photography quite seriously. And I remember learning about Ansel Adams. Ansel Adams was this early photographer. He was famous for, his big sprawling mountainous landscapes that he would make. He would like go and climb up on a mountain with his big like clunky camera. He'd sit there for like 12 hours or whatever it was, right? And from Ansel Adams's perspective, the medium, photography, was this just tremendous effort, right? Like it was just like he spent like his entire life doing it, and he spent probably so much hours on the technicals of developing the photos and capturing the photos. And then, we fast forward like a century, right? And we have iPhones, and anyone can like point and click and create a photograph in a split second. And so in some ways, the medium of this digital format has a little bit like devalued like how expensive it is to make a photograph, and therefore like how much you can sell a photograph for. But in other ways, it also has democratized photography, because before only people like Ansel Adams could do it, but now everyone has access to it, and anyone who has skills in in composition, or has an interest in photography, like can now enjoy doing this activity. And so I feel kind of the same about digital art in general, right? Like um, you have this overarching like art world. You have a lot of physical mediums, um, and you have a little bit of like digital work happening. But it's historically, digital art has been like very hard to make. I was just like privy to a digital artwork from something like the late 80s or something, and it was this giant canvas with like an old computer built into the back and a screen, and like when you turned it on, it was like this generative work, but it really just looked kind of like lines. And it was probably state of the art at the time, but so difficult to make, and probably required so much energy. Well, now you can make generative artworks, on your computer by just typing in some lines of code. And so again, we have sort of like lowered the barrier to entry to digital art, and we perhaps devalued digital art a little bit, but we also democratized it in a way that so many talented people can participate. Now, what happens when you add the financial aspect to that story of the blockchain and of the fact that these enthusiasts can actually like find their talent and then go and monetize it by selling these works to people who enjoy them, then this is a game changer, right? This is like, this opens up a whole market of uh, people who can now maybe make a living doing the things that they love. And when I think about the growth of, the digital art space in particular as it relates to NFTs, I think about going to a website like, I don't know, Behance.net, right? Where a lot of digital creators showcase their works in photography and design and so forth. And I think about how most of them use the internet to showcase, but almost none of them ever use the internet to actually sell the works. And by putting these works on the blockchain, how much value you would actually unlock and be able to generate for this market of people is kind of mind-boggling. So that's sort of where I am. I think the medium is, it's democratizing. I think it lowers barriers. I think it lowers the price point so more people can buy it. And I think it creates new markets that we didn't have before.
Yeah, that's exciting, and I think other touch points that might be of interest in terms of precedent would be, I would say, things like Patreon, which would be one non-blockchain kind of digital art sponsorship. I think music is interesting as well as visual. I don't know if you have any comment there, but I'd say the other one that's kind of interesting that's emergent as well is OnlyFans. So, I think
Uh-huh.
OnlyFans is controversial because of its connection with the adult entertainment industry, but I think that the combination of cryptographic assets, blockchain, art, and adult content is also a thing. So I guess to me the two
Absolutely.
contents that I'm interested in having your comment on are music and
Yeah.
audio content of any kind, and then of course
Yes.
the adult segment.
So I do think that the music side of things is a little bit trickier, and one of the reasons is that the way that music has historically been created was through these like giant distributors, giant record labels. Those big companies, they really made it a point to own the intellectual property rights to those music. So things like the Beatles, all
Yep.
the classic bands that you love, of course, their IP is trapped, as private assets of these companies. And so the challenge with music is not so much like, can we get historic music online, because that seems like really, really hard. It's more like, can we, going forward, create a model for recording artists where they get the same or better distribution that they get from these kind of classical incumbents, but they have strong and expansive ownership of their body of work. And look, even people like Taylor Swift, for whom this is a huge political issue, like her early works are, she signed them away and they got purchased by third parties to the point that she can't even perform some of her own early music without getting permission,
Yep.
right? And so she's been one of the activists around like, can we get artists to own their music more? Imogen Heap in London
Yep.
has been a huge proponent of this as well, and she's worked in the blockchain space, right? And so I do think it's like trickier for music, and I think that music NFTs will probably sell, and I hope I'm wrong on this, but I think they'll sell a little bit worse than art NFTs until there are venues which, like Audius, for example, where you create these like blockchain native revenue streams as well. So I think, in other words, the reason that why someone would purchase an NFT piece of music is because they're really looking for that royalty stream. And until the products that establish those royalty streams actually come to market, like Audius, and others, until those products actually happen, like it'll be like, I think, harder to sell those kinds of works. But I think over time, we will move to this model, and it will be very big.
Nice, nice. And any last comment? This is a funny note to end on, but like, I think there is stuff going on in this space, which is the adult content space.
Yes. I have not, to be honest, spent a bunch of time here. I know that there's been work done in blockchain and adult, with projects like Spank Chain from Amin Soleimani. I don't see those projects as being, they're kind of ongoing, but I don't see them as being like huge
It's
outright
not
successes.
influential.
I think there's a lot of work to do, and adult, well, I wouldn't even say that. I think they built a great brand, but I just don't see a lot of people kind of using it. I don't see a lot of adult industry traction there. Um, OnlyFans, I don't know too much about, but I think probably the same sort of ideas would apply there, right? It's probably around payments would be the primary use case of blockchain and something like that, and then maybe digital rights to content. But again, it seems less of a probable thing to me,
I
at
think
least in the
the
short
I
term.
think the model of something like an OnlyFans is, as far as I understand, I've never actually been on the website, is that a lot of the exclusive content is similar. It's similar to Patreon in the sense that exclusive content is
Hmm.
evidence of relationship, right? So that's what it's.
Yes,
So it's not actually about the ownership rights over the content. It's more about proof of the uniqueness of a relationship, right? So what happens? It's very
got it.
similar to kind of art patronship in history, which is that you would have kind of essentially a wealthy class, and then you would have patronage over kind of artists. And in general, it follows the kind of power law distribution in the sense that, like, the economic models are very much about catering to the kind of the highest economic interests on the site.
Yeah, I could totally see that perspective on unique relationships and denoting them as probably non-fungible tokens, right? So yeah, it's interesting. And to be fair, like in that area of adult entertainment, I guess, there's definitely been blockchain interest from major players in that space previously, and I don't think we're done there yet. I think that's going to be a huge application of blockchain.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's only interesting insofar as, adult content has been, along with things like gambling and, these types of, I guess, vice industries tend to be early adopters of new technology, so I think that's, and that I think gaming, just in terms of video gaming and not gambling, are also early adopters of any new technology trend. So, I think those are the reasons why I think those become sort of salient participants in a phenomenon
Hmm.
like this. But I would say, this has been a fascinating conversation. I always enjoy it very much.
Yeah, Miko, thanks so much for having me on. And it's been, I've done a lot of these NFT podcasts like recently, but we've really dug into some of the digital art use cases and some of the details of how people actually use this stuff. So I really appreciate your questions and you digging in that deeply.
Thanks so much. Really enjoyed it. Okay, see you soon.
Okay, thanks, Miko. Take care.